UFC Vancouver goes down in a week, and the UFC is kind of on a roll here. I want to say this is their eighth straight non-Apex event, which is cool to see traveling around the world. This next week's card is going to be in Canada, and I think there's some fun matchups. So I'm going to be going through, giving my full card predictions, main card, and the prelims. There's going to be timestamps in the description if you guys want to jump around to specific matchups. But let's just dive right into the breakdowns here. Starting off on the early prelims, we have a women's bantamweight fight between Melissa Croden and Tainara Lisboa. For Croden, this is her UFC debut. She has a 6-2 pro record, and watching some of her regional fights, she really loves a gritty fight. She wants to find her way into the clinch, land her elbows, land some nice knees. Also, when she does get the fight to the ground, she has some pretty calculated ground and pound, can do some damage there. So definitely an interesting addition to this weight class. And then on the other side with Tainara, she has a 2-1 UFC record. All three of her fights have been very grappling heavy. In her UFC debut, she picked up a submission win against Jessica Rose Clark, then a decision win against Ravena Oliveira, and then her most recent fight was submitted by Luana Santos. Kind of got dominated on the ground in that one. I'm leaning towards Croden in this matchup. I think they're both going to want the fight in similar areas. And I think once they start to clinch up, I think Croden's going to be landing the more damaging strikes. I don't see her just getting taken and held down. It's certainly possible. She hasn't fought a ton of top competition, but I think she's going to do really well in the clinch. I think it could potentially discourage some of the grappling, the takedowns from Lisboa. And so I'm going to go with Croden to get her debut win here by decision. Then a middleweight fight. Kind of surprised this one is so early, at least with the current bout order. We have Azamat Bekoev taking on Yousri Belgaroui. Bekoev's a pretty interesting prospect here. Very well-rounded, powerful striker, good grappler. 20 pro wins, 8 by knockout, 8 by submission, and then 4 by decision, and still pretty young at 29 years old. It's always fun when you start to get some interesting prospects, especially in the heavier weight classes where it seems like they're kind of few and far between. And then his opponent, Belgaroui here, I'm sure I'm butchering that name, I apologize. This is his UFC debut, pretty high-level kickboxer. He is a huge middleweight, massive frame, 6'5", with a 79-inch reach. He fought twice in the Contender Series, went 1-1. In his win, he did beat a pretty low-level opponent. On the feet, he has a nice jab, obviously uses that frame, fights very well from range. In this matchup, I just do not trust his grappling. In his first Contender Series fight, he was out-grappled by Marco Tulio, who's more known as a striker within the UFC. And then even in the fight he won against Iwasaki, he was still too willing to kind of engage in the clinch work, just kind of get controlled, give his back. And I just think in a matchup against Bekoev, who is a very capable grappler, I think he's going to take advantage of that. So I'm going to go with Azamat Bekoev by round 1 submission. I think he gets the fight to the ground, and then I think he finds the sub win. Then at women's strawweight, we have a matchup between Stephanie Luciano and Ravena Oliveira. I'm a fan of Luciano. I think she's a fun style. She's a fun striker on the feet, very light, works all 3 levels, mixes things up, has some really nice kicks. She had a pretty clean flying knee knockdown in her UFC debut win. Didn't finish it, but she did land that strike. And then she kind of has a unique style with the hands where she keeps them kind of low. She throws from awkward angles, can end up, landing big shots that way. The big issue for Luciano so far has just been the grappling defense. She was taken down 4 times in the Contender Series, controlled for 6.5 minutes. That's the reason why that Contender Series fight went to a draw. And then she kind of corrected that in her debut. She rematched the girl she fought on the Contender Series, looked good in the grappling department, but then her most recent fight, a split decision loss to Sam Hughes. She was taken down 3 times, controlled for 4 minutes, really didn't look great in that area, especially in round 2 where Sam Hughes was threatening a submission, also landing a lot of ground and pound. So not a great look there. On the other side with Oliveira, she only has 1 UFC fight, lost that one, but that was all the way back in 2023, so a pretty long layoff. She was actually out-grappled by Lisboa, who I already talked about in this video. But in Oliveira's 7 pro wins, only 1 came against someone with a winning record, and then 5 of her 7 wins came against opponents who had not picked up a single win. So she has just not fought a solid strength of schedule. I think Luciano is just going to be the better fighter here. I think she's going to eat her alive on the feet, and I think she's going to pick up a pretty clear decision win. Then we have a really fun matchup at 155 with Kyle Prepolec taking on Drew Dober. And for Prepolec, this is pretty brutal matchmaking. In his first stint in the UFC, he had an 0-2 record, was cut, then, went elsewhere, picked up some wins, got a short notice opportunity on, I believe, a pay-per-view against Benoit Saint-Denis. Yeah, I think it was like UFC 315. So he takes that really tough matchup against BSD, fights a decent fight, ends up getting finished in the second round. But now he is sitting at 0-3 in the UFC, and they're rewarding him for taking that short notice fight with a matchup against a very hungry Drew Dober coming off a rough stretch. Prepolec is a southpaw striker, does have some pretty dangerous head kicks, still kind of stiff on the feet, pretty hittable. Like I talked about in that BSD fight, he is very tough. He's never been knocked out, showed a lot of heart in that fight, took some big shots, never really wilted before he did get submitted in that second round. On the other side with Drew Dober, he's kind of had a rough stretch here, 3 straight losses. He's lost 4 of his last 5. Now, it has been against pretty solid competition. He lost against Matt Frevola, who's also going to be on this card. Hanato Moicano, top 15 guy. Jean Silva, top 15 dude at featherweight. And then Manuel Torres, who's kind of climbing up the rankings. That was his most recent loss, or looking to actually break into the rankings. I think the big issue for Dober is that it does seem like the durability is starting to fade. He'd only been knocked out once in his first 37 pro fights. He's been knocked out 3 different times in his last 5 matchups, and that was kind of a calling card where he could take a lot of damage, but eventually he could find that big shot. You saw it in the Bobby Green fight. He's getting pieced up. All he needs is that one huge, I think it was a left hand, and Bobby Green's going to sleep. Drew Dober, southpaw, great athlete, super explosive, hits very hard. I am not expecting a long drawn out fight. I think this could be a really quick war, potential fight of the year contender between these two dudes. Dober is ultra aggressive. He's a lot of offense, not a lot of defense. Prepolec is totally fine to get into those style of fights, and he will throw back. I do just trust the power, the finishing ability of Drew Dober a little bit more. Prepolec, like I talked about, not the most defensive guy, does kind of lead his chin out there to be hit. So I think Drew Dober bounces back in this matchup. I'm going to go with Drew Dober by round 1 knockout. Then up at middleweight, we have a matchup between Danny Barlow and Jourdain Santos. This is Barlow moving up to 185. Not sure if this is just a one-fight thing or if this is actually a permanent move up for him, but he's currently 2-1 in the UFC. He is coming off kind of a rough knockout loss to Sam Patterson, a fight that I think a lot of people thought he'd be winning by knockout. Ends up getting hurt, clipped. Barlow's a really solid athlete. He hits very hard. He's very explosive, has that nasty left hand, but he's not the most technical guy in the world. He is a little bit reckless, doesn't always have the hands up, can kind of, explode into range in not the most defensively responsible way, and he can leave himself exposed to get countered like we saw in that Sam Patterson fight. So he does have that big power, but can also leave himself a little bit vulnerable at times. On the other side with Santos here, he is 0-1 in the UFC, pretty competitive debut, a fight that really could have gone either way against Ozzy Diaz. I just think there's going to be a major athleticism disadvantage here for Santos, where he's got good cardio. He can push a pace. He averages 7.2 significant strikes per minute. But I just think explosiveness-wise, the power, it really just does not stack up to Barlow in this matchup. Now, we could see Santos look to grapple. 4 of his 10 wins have come by submission. I just think we're going to see that athleticism gap, and I'm not confident that Santos has the power, the danger factor to really capitalize on Barlow's kind of, loose, reckless style. So I think Barlow's going to bounce back here. I think he's going to get an early knockout. I'm going Danny Barlow, round 1 KO. Then going all the way down to men's flyweight, we have a really fun matchup actually here. I think this one could potentially be fight of the night contender. Bruno Silva taking on Hyun Sung Park. I was someone who was really high on Park. I think I did a video a while ago talking about the best prospect in every weight class, dudes outside the top 15. And I'm pretty sure I chose Park for flyweight. And so he got a big opportunity, short notice fight against Tatsuro Taira. Did not go his way. It was a pretty dominant loss. He got beat up on the feet. He was out grappled by Taira. But I'm still not off the hype train here. I still think he can be a really solid player in this weight class. He's finished 9 of his 10 wins, 4 by knockout, 5 by submission. He's an impressive grappler, has solid submission skills, Also, really nice ground and pound. He is a little bit hittable on the feet. We've seen that in his UFC career so far. He's been dropped in 3 of his last fights. Certainly an area of concern, but still a fighter who I think is very solid and pretty well-rounded. On the other side with Bruno Silva, he's had a tough run as of late. Back-to-back knockout losses to Joshua Van and Manel Kopp. Now, admittedly, that is, a really tough strength of schedule. 2 guys that are players in the title picture, but pretty dominant losses to both of those dudes. We have seen Bruno Silva land knockdowns in all 4 of his UFC wins, so he certainly has some power. And then his last 6 fights have ended inside the distance, so he's been pretty kill or be killed. I think some of the issues here with Silva is that he hasn't shown a ton of grappling success in some of his recent fights. Also, he's getting up there in age, like he's 35, and that might not seem super old, but like all the way down at flyweight, that is kind of significant. He's also taken a lot of damage in back-to-back fights. Like I think he was dropped 4 different times in total in those 2 matchups. So I'm going to lean towards the younger prospect here in Hyun Sung Park. I know he took a little bit of damage in that Tetsuro Taira fight, but I do like that he's hungry, wants to get a pretty quick turnaround there. So I think Hyun Sung Park is going to come out. He's going to push the pace. I think he could do some damage on the feet. I think he's going to mix in the grappling. I think he ends up finding a finish in round 2, and I'll go with a ground and pound knockout. So I'm going to back my guy, Hyun Sung Park. Now, moving up 1 weight class, we have Charles Jourdain taking on Davey Grant. I also think this is a really, really fun matchup. Jourdain is 1-0 since moving down to 135. I believe it was a submission win against Victor Henry. He's a southpaw striker, throws a lot of volume out on the feet. Pretty diverse striking skill set, likes the straight shots, use his kind of longer frame, has nice kicks, knees, elbows. I think some of the issues for Jourdain, at least as of late, he hasn't really shown that danger factor where he has not landed a single knockdown in his last 9 fights. On the other side here with Davey Grant, I'm a big fan of him, admittedly. I think he's one of the most underrated fighters in the UFC. In his last 10 UFC fights, he has a 7-3 record, with 2 of those losses being split decisions. One of them a fight that I think he definitely should have won against Daniel Marcos. The other one, I did think Adrian Yanez kind of edged him out in that one. Within the UFC, he's primarily just been a striker. Pre-UFC did show off a little bit more of the grappling, still has solid submission skills, but very unwilling to actually shoot takedowns at this stage in his career. I've talked about this in other prediction videos talking about Davey Grant, but he does have this very odd style where if you look at him from like the waist down, but like kick wise, they're very technical, they're very sharp. And then when you look at his upper half, he's like very kind of loose and he's winging like these awkward punches. It's just kind of weird to see like the contrast between like the actual boxing and then some of his kicks. Just kind of thought that was interesting. And then in terms of power, he does have some pop on his punches, carries that power late into fights, and then also very durable. He has never been knocked out. So I'm expecting a pretty competitive matchup. I think if these guys are just going strike for strike, it's going to be a fun matchup. I do just lean toward Davey Grant here. It is tough to just like outclass him on the feet. We have seen him get into some competitive striking matchups against, guys like Daniel Marcos, Adrian Yanez, but typically he is faring pretty well in those. So I'm going to go with Davey Grant to pick up the decision win. I want to say he's a betting underdog, so I think he gets it done here as a dog. 39 years old, still really impressive at bantamweight. Then we're going to go to lightweight, where we have Kyle Nelson taking on Matt Frevola. This is Kyle Nelson moving up to 155. Did have a pretty solid frame for 145, so don't necessarily hate it. Not sure if this is a long-term home here, but he is coming off a round 1 knockout loss to Steve Garcia. Took a lot of damage in that fight, ate a lot of elbows, but he was riding a 3-fight win streak heading into that matchup. He's almost exclusively a striker. Has some solid finishing instincts. If he does get a guy hurt, he is really going to throw a lot out there, really going to unload. The issue is he's just not consistently hurting his opponents. He is pretty striking heavy, but doesn't have like the most dangerous, arsenal. Doesn't have a ton of pop, not a ton of power on the feet. But he might not need it against Matt Frevola because Frevola is very much kill or be killed. He has been knocked out in back-to-back matchups. His last win was actually all the way back in May of 2023. His last 6 fights have ended by knockout. 3 of those have been wins, but 3 of those have been losses. I do think in this matchup, he is going to have way more just like raw KO power. He is the dude that's been locked in at 155. but I also think he's a little bit less durable than Kyle Nelson. 4 of his 5 losses have come by knockout. I think there's going to be a finish in this fight. I do think it ends inside the distance. I don't love that Kyle Nelson is moving up against someone who does have the power that Matt Frevola does have. So I think this one, could end fairly early. I'm going to side with Matt Frevola here. I'm going to take him by round 1 KO. Then at bantamweight, we have Cody Gibson taking on Aoriqileng. This is pretty locked in as a striker versus grappler matchup. Cody Gibson being the grappler, Aoriqileng being the striker. Cody Gibson has attempted at least 5 takedowns in his last 4 fights. He does have a pretty big frame for 135, 5'10", with a 71-inch reach, and he is coming off a round 2 Kimura loss to Damone Blackshear, a fight where he was actually looking pretty good on the feet, kind of forced the grappling, and then ends up getting caught in that submission by Blackshear, who does have really solid jiu-jitsu. For Aoriqileng, he is a striker who has kind of shown some questionable grappling holes in the UFC, only 58% takedown defense. Even in his last 2 wins, he was taken down 3 times and 4 times in those matchups. And then he doesn't have a ton of finishing upside, only 1 finish in the UFC. 9 of his 25 wins have come inside the distance. I like Cody Gibson here in these matchups where one guy just kind of specializes as a striker, but isn't super dangerous, doesn't have a ton of finishing upside. I do kind of like siding with the guy that can mix things up. And Cody Gibson isn't a 0 on the feet. Like I said, he was outstriking Damone Blackshear, but he can mix it up. He can rack up control time, potentially threaten with his own submissions. So I'm going to lean towards Cody Gibson here by decision. Then we have a ranked women's matchup between Manon Fiorot and Jasmine Jasudavicius. I do think this is the fight to make. You're probably looking at the Valentina Weili super fight. You have Natalia Silva, who I think it's kind of reasonable that she could just sit and wait for a title shot. Don't really want to kill off viable contenders in a shallower weight class. And so I do like this matchup. I think Jasmine's probably one big win away from getting in line for that title. But Manon Fiorot is certainly not someone that she's going to be able to just walk through. Fiorot was 1 round away from beating Valentina, taking that title off of her. That was her first MMA loss since her very first pro fight, so she had not lost a fight since her debut. She's pretty big for this weight class. She can fight at a solid pace. She's gone 5 rounds multiple times, never really looked exhausted. Also has great takedown defense, all the way up at 87%. And she's taken on some solid grapplers, Erin Blanchfield, Rose Namajunas. Neither of those women were really able to do anything to her on the ground. On the other side with Jasmine Jasudavicius, she is riding a 5-fight win streak. All of those wins have come since 2024, so she has kept super active. And then she's also shown some of the finishing upside. 3 of those 5 wins have been by sub. She's going to come out. She's going to push a really high pace. She's active on the feet, but she's looking to set up the wrestling. She has really solid control grappling. She's also pretty big for this weight class, throws a lot of volume on the ground, and then also, like I talked about, has shown some of those submission skills. On the feet, she's not the cleanest. She's kind of sloppy, loose, a little bit hittable. The striking is really a means to an end to just try to set up the grappling and get the fight down. I do just think in this matchup, Fiorot just seems like an awful stylistic matchup for Jasmine Jasudavicius. She's big, she's physically imposing, she has really solid takedown defense. She's not reckless on the feet, so she's not someone that's going to make a ton of mistakes to set up a lot of shots for Jasmine. So I am going to pick Fiorot here. I am a pretty big fan of Jasmine Jasudavicius. I like her style. She really goes for it. But I think Fiorot is going to set her back here. I think Fiorot picks up the decision win. Then at bantamweight, we have Chito Vera taking on Aiemann Zahabi. And I will just say right off the bat, Chito Vera is one of my favorite fighters, so this might be a little bit biased. He's been out for over a year after the Davison Figueiredo loss. He has a style which, as a fan, I can admit, it is pretty frustrating. He can be overly patient at times, doesn't always fully go for it, doesn't unload. But when he does actually, throw a lot of volume out there, he is a pretty deep striking bag. He can fight from both stances, great kicks, spinning attacks. We saw the hook kicks against Rob Font, also has nice knees, elbows. He is very, very durable. And I think kind of has deceptively good defense. That might seem crazy to say after watching Sean O'Malley just butcher him for 5 rounds. But he does do a decent job, maybe not against the most elite strikers in the world, but he does do a good job kind of deflecting shots. He takes a lot of shots off of the arms. And I think you can even sometimes see that in fights like the Rob Font matchup, where you look at the significant strike numbers and it looks like Font landed a million times. And you look at Chito Vera's face and it's like, he just woke up. There's nothing there. Some of that is just he has like subhuman durability. But I also think he is a little bit more defensively responsible than people give him credit for. One area where I do think Aiemann Zahabi and certain opponents can capitalize, I think we definitely saw this in the Corey Sandhagen fight, but in an effort to be defensively responsible, he keeps the high guard up and kind of just retreats backwards, which can certainly deflect some of the shots, but it also kind of limits the counters that Chito can throw out there. And then it also makes him susceptible to longer combinations where you can throw your shots, but if you see he's still backing up with the hands up, you can then extend those combinations. Like I said, I think Corey Sandhagen did a really good job of capitalizing on that in his matchup against Chito. Now, on the other side with Aiemann Zahabi, he has a very unique skill set for bantamweight where he's just not someone you see, like his style, it's not something you see a lot of and like have guys be successful, especially in these lighter weight classes where he is not some sort of elite athlete. He's not the most technical guy in the world, but he has his own kind of unique style and it works for him. I will say he does have like some pretty solid, just like raw power. So I guess that's like some sort of physical advantage that he has. But overall, nothing crazy athletically. He has a very squared stance. He's got this weird posture where he's kind of hunched over, but he has a great jab. He throws well in combination. He mixes his punches and kicks very well. Also has good cardio. Kind of similarly to Chito, he doesn't really push a pace. Like I think these guys could kind of get into like a lower volume, just like pot shotting type of fight because neither guy, if like they're not going to get pushed, they're fine kind of just chilling out, just picking at their opponents. Doesn't really pose a real grappling threat. Zahabi only one takedown in his UFC career. And so like I said, I do think this could be lower volume. I do think the one area where Chito may struggle is that Zahabi is kind of awkward. And so I do think we could get a lot of those exchanges where Chito doesn't feel comfortable like landing a clean counter and he's kind of just like retreating, eating some of the combinations from Zahabi. But then when I'm just looking at the type of fight I think this is going to be, I do think Chito Vera hits a little bit harder. I think his overall skill set is more dangerous in terms of like actually hurting dudes, finding a knockout, or just like stamping around with a big moment. And then I also trust Chito's durability a little bit more. Now, it does seem to have faded a little bit. He took a lot of damage against Sean O'Malley. He was dropped for the first time in his career by Davison Figueiredo. But like even the drop, like he recovered very quickly. It wasn't like he was seriously hurt there. So I'm going to slightly lean towards Chito. I could see this fight going either way. I can also picture myself watching this fight next Saturday and just being unbelievably frustrated with Chito's lack of urgency. I am throwing that out there, like I know that's a possibility. I'm going to back my guy by decision. Hopefully he gets it done, but I also like Zahabi, like nothing against him. I think both these guys are interesting. Now I think this is the co-main event, between Kevin Holland and Mike Malott up at welterweight. Starting off with Kevin Holland, I think we have to talk about his last performance because going into that Daniel Rodriguez fight, I thought it was a really solid matchup for Kevin Holland. He was going up against someone who was not going to be able to wrestle him, was not going to be able to take him down, hold him there. On the feet, Daniel Rodriguez was not someone who was known for having crazy power, just like not someone that was going to be super dangerous where, he can beat you on the feet. He's a crafty striker, but he's not going to go out there and just nuke you. And so I thought all across the board, Kevin Holland had the advantage. And I think I picked him probably by like round 2 or 3 knockout, something like that. And I thought he just looked terrible. He ended up getting dropped twice in that matchup. In the 3rd round, he had a prime opportunity to finish Daniel Rodriguez. He didn't have enough gas left in the tank to do that. And Kevin Holland is someone who kind of relies on his durability. And he's only 32 years old, but it's going to be a real problem moving forward if that durability is kind of fading. I also don't love the quick turnaround. Took a lot of damage in that fight. That was July 19th. Coming back in October, don't love that. Now, he still is dangerous, right? He's very rangy for this weight class. He hits hard, has really solid submission skills. But overall, I don't like what we saw in the last fight, and I don't like that he is returning so quickly to the octagon. On the other side with Malott, I'm going to be honest with you guys, I still don't really know what to make of him at this point. Like, he's had a decent number of UFC fights. He's a well-rounded finisher. He's finished 11 of his 12 wins, 5 by knockout, 6 by submission, but we haven't truly seen him tested. Like, he's picked up a lot of wins in the UFC, but it's been against like pretty meh competition like Charles Radke, Trevin Giles, Adam Fugit, Johan Laness, and then Mickey Gall. And then even the time that he lost, like, he still wasn't tested, right? Like, he was cruising to a win against Neil Magny, and then his gas tank just completely emptied with like a minute left and got finished. And so it's like, yeah, he lost. I guess you could say he was tested in that way, but it's not like we saw him go up against someone who was just better than him and see where he could have been exposed. Like, for 14 minutes of that fight, Mike Malott just looked like the better guy, and then the gas tank just hit zero and he was finished. So it's kind of weird. Like, I do think Kevin Holland's probably, I guess, aside from Neil Magny, the best guy he's gone up against. And I think Kevin Holland does have the tools to make this fight uncomfortable if he can fight from range, you know, potentially pressure Mike Malott a little bit, where on the gas tank, the thing is, you just cannot trust Kevin Holland to fight intelligently at all. The fight IQ is pretty much non-existent. In fact, he'll like go out of his way to fight in a way that's like worse for him to actually win the matchup. So I'm going to go with Mike Malott here. I'm kind of conflicted. I don't feel great about it. I'm going to pick Mike Malott by round 2 knockout. He hits hard. We've seen him find some of those big shots in his UFC matchups. And like I said, Kevin Holland looking a little bit more hittable. Durability is a concern. Quick turnaround. I think we see Mike Malott end up finishing at Kevin Holland by KO. And then we have arrived at the main event. Reinier de Ridder taking on Brendan Allen. Would have loved to see the Anthony Hernandez matchup, but in terms of like short notice replacements, I think Brendan Allen is solid. You know, shout out to him for stepping up here. I do think this is an interesting stylistic matchup. Brendan Allen has a skill set where he's going to be a tough out for a lot of middleweights. He has the grappling to kind of frustrate some of the strikers. Also, he is capable enough on the feet where some of like the more pure grapplers he's gone up against, thinking of like a Paul Craig, the dude who just lost, the Brazilian dude, Andre Muniz, like guys like that, they're also going to struggle against Brendan Allen because he is pretty solid on the feet. But I think when you're getting to like the upper echelon of middleweights, I don't know if Brendan Allen excels enough in one specific area to really kind of stamp some of these matchups. So he's coming off a unanimous decision win against Marvin Vettori. Before that, he had back-to-back losses against Nasruddin Imavov and Anthony Hernandez. I think what's so frustrating about Brendan Allen is that even in those losses, both of those fights were winnable, and the fight IQ really just failed him, especially in the Fluffy fight. Like, he was just way too willing to engage in the grappling when he could have just taken certain positions. He was making like these reckless decisions, and it just straight up led to him losing that matchup in a fight that he definitely could have won. Now, looking at Reinier de Ridder, I think he is the clear better grappler in this matchup. 14 of his 21 wins are by submission. He doesn't have the greatest wrestling. It's certainly a question mark. You look at the most recent fight against Whitaker, he only went 2 for 15. But overall, this kind of style he's developing, where he's able to push the pace, find his way into the clinch, even if he's not extremely effective at landing the takedown, it still just all works together and can lead to like a pretty tough puzzle to solve. And so like we saw in that Whitaker fight, he was, pushing the pace for a lot of that matchup. He has a nice jab. That knee that he landed on Bo Nickel, it's turned into just like his new favorite strike, where he was throwing that a million times against Robert Whitaker, and it just looks awful to eat that. He's got like this long frame. He's kind of skinny, so it just seems like, his elbows, knees are just sharper than other dudes, and he can just dig that into the body. It just looks really awful to potentially take that shot. He's good in the clinch, can also land that from distance like we have seen. Overall, I think it's really tough to kind of deter that type of style, just someone in your face, constantly pressuring you, working in the clinch, unless you can discourage them with just like huge knockout power. And I don't think that Brendan Allen has that. And so I do think that Brendan Allen has the skill set to keep this competitive. I think he can stuff the takedowns for the most part. Like, yeah, de Ridder might be able to take him down a few times, but I think he can keep this standing. I just don't really trust his IQ, kind of like I talked about with Kevin Holland. It's like he might have the tools. I just don't really trust Brendan Allen to fight a super smart fight. And like to win this one, he might have to like take a 3-2 fight, or maybe he can win like a close 4-1. Like, I think the rounds are going to be back and forth. I just don't believe in his overall intelligence to get him there. I think at some point he's going to force a bad grappling exchange. He's going to go for a submission over position at some point, and I think RDR is going to take advantage of that. So I'm going to pick RDR by submission. I went back and forth between, I honestly think he could finish it in any of the three ways, but I'm going to go with RDR round 3 sub. I think he's going to show levels in the grappling. I think Brendan Allen's going to make some sort of mistake. He might start to fatigue, and so I'm going to go with Reinier de Ridder to pick up the submission win. But that is going to wrap it up for my full card predictions. Let me know your thoughts down below. You agree with my picks, you disagree, let me hear it. But thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.